Hi everyone, and welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Elizabeth and I run the blog lifefromtheviolasection.com, where I share my favorite practice tips, general advice, and tech for musicians. If you are a regular viewer of the channel, first of all, thank you. But second of all, thank you for your patience through October, as I got married towards the end of the month and just had to take some time away from YouTube and my blog in order to focus on all the wedding planning requires. And I just needed kind of a couple weeks to breathe a little bit before and after that. So I'm super happy and ready to get back to weekly videos every week for the rest of the year, probably through to the holidays. So if you don't already know, you might have seen my channel name, Life from the Viola Section, but I am mostly a violist. That is my primary main instrument. And spoiler alert, it is my favorite instrument. But it's not the instrument that I started on. I actually started with the piano when I was almost 6, I believe, because my mom is a piano teacher. But deep down, I always really wanted to play the violin, and I was always begging my parents to let me learn how to play the violin. And my mom said, first, try out the piano, see what you think of actually playing an instrument and reading music, and then if you still want to play the violin after maybe a year or two, we will find a violin teacher. So I started piano and I loved it. I still wanted to play the violin though. And then when I was 8, a small local youth string orchestra came to perform at my elementary school, and I came home and I said, I found a violin teacher. And of course we had to give her a call, and the rest is history with me playing string instruments. So I started playing the violin before I started playing the viola. A couple years later, I heard the Bruch Romance played on viola, and it was like my life was changed. It was one of the most beautiful sounds that I had ever heard, and I just felt like that's the string instrument for me. That's the sound that I want to have. So the very next day, I borrowed a viola. I started teaching myself, and then shortly after, I got a real teacher, and the rest is history. Viola from then on was always my main instrument. I joined my youth orchestra on viola, not violin, and then I majored in viola performance, and then got my Master of Music degree in viola performance as well. But I never stopped playing the violin and piano. I love those as well, and I teach all three here in my studio in Richmond, Virginia. So personally, I love being multi-instrumental. It keeps you really versatile, it keeps you on your toes, and it's just fun. You know, the more music I can create, the better. It's awesome. But if you are a violinist, you might feel a little pull towards viola sometimes when you hear it. You know, if the E string sometimes bothers you, feels a little bit grating, if you want that really rich sound, the viola might be calling to you. So today I'm going to share the differences between the violin and the viola, what it's like to actually switch between these two instruments, and that includes both technical shifts and mindset shifts as well, because changing your identity as a musician actually is a big mental shift. So we're gonna cover all of that today, and I'm super excited. So first, let's go over the differences between the violin and the viola. The viola is not just a larger violin, even though it might look that way, especially as an outsider. There's more to it than that. There's a lot of things you need to consider. But I have my full-size violin here today, and my 16-inch viola. A lot of women my size, I'm 5'3", will play on 16-inch violas, maybe a little smaller, maybe a little bit larger, but I feel like 16 inch is pretty much the average. Now, a full-size violin is generally considered the equivalent to a 14-size-inch viola, because that's about the length of the body. And when I'm talking about sizes in inches, we measure just the body. So from the button here up to the top of the body here. We do not measure all the way to the scroll. That would be a lot longer. So here is the comparison of my violin versus my viola. So you can see they have the same basic general shape, because that's the style of viola that I have, which is probably the most common, but it's a little bit larger. It's also a little bit thicker as well, and the fingerboard is wider as well. I'll let you kind of get a good look at those differences. Again, violin, viola. Now, I have a pretty heavy viola, and I've tried a few different things over the years to make it a little bit lighter. So mine is a little bit of a heavy outlier, but no matter what kind of viola you get, it will likely be a little bit heavier than the violin, and I can feel the difference in the weight just holding them here right now. Because of that weight, and because the viola is wider, both this way and with the fingerboard as well, finding the right size viola for you is really important, because if you get a super big heavy viola, your arm is going to get tired from helping to hold it up. And also you have to think about the distance between notes too. If you have to constantly stretch to reach octaves or any kind of interval, that's going to really tire out your hand, and it can lead to injuries. I've gotten injuries. I kind of get a recurring injury if I play too many octaves on the viola just from stretching my fourth finger a little bit too far. I get a lot of pain right here where the muscles connect and into my wrist as well. So you have to be very aware of potential injuries and make sure that you find a viola that is the correct size for your body. All right, so the biggest difference that people think of, aside from the size, is the tuning of the strings on the viola. The viola actually has the same named strings as the cello, but is all 1 octave higher. So the lowest string, which is on the left, is the C string. The next string to the right is the G, which is the same as the violin's lowest string, G. Then we have D string, same as the violin, and then we have A, also the same A as the violin. We just do not have that E string. Instead, we have that low C added on. Now, the tone of the viola is going to naturally be different anyway because of the size and shape of it. Because the viola is larger than the violin, there's more room for resonance within the viola and outside of it as well. So on the violin, you might notice that the sound kind of just dies away very quickly. On the viola, that's gonna last a lot longer. I can still feel it vibrating, but I can't hear it anymore. And now it's done. So the viola is going to naturally have a richer tone. Now, an interesting little viola fact that I do want to share is that the proportions of the instrument are not good for the notes and the resonance that we want to achieve. The violin and the cello are perfectly proportioned, where it's able to resonate in a way that perfectly matches with the physics of the instrument. The viola does not do that. If we wanted this to be proportionately correct, it would be a lot larger, and you would not be able to play that on your shoulder. It would instead have to be played more like a gamba. Another big difference between the violin and the viola is really the role that you play on your instrument. The viola is an inner voice. It has a lot of harmonies. It weaves in and out of the melody, which I really enjoy. I like stepping into the spotlight and then coming away from it and maybe doing that a bunch of times within a piece. You might have a lot of like rhythmic responsibility within the ensemble, and you really help support the melody without necessarily being in the spotlight the whole way through. A lot of people enjoy that. A lot of other people wish that they had more melody, and it kind of depends on the composer of the music that you're playing. Sometimes they will really put the viola in the spotlight. Other times, you know, if you're playing like Sleigh Ride or something along those lines, you're just playing the offbeats on an open G the whole time. And that does get boring really quickly. But just to know, if you're switching from the violin, where maybe you're playing the melody almost always, the viola is going to be a difference because it is an inner voice. When you play the viola, you really do have to think about blending your sound into others. As you're not the main focus, you're not in the foreground all of the time, you don't necessarily want to have a tone that is different from everyone else's. If you're playing solo violin, you might want your sound to be really bright so that it is in the foreground and then the darker sounds are in the background. Now on the viola, you're going to be one of those kind of darker sounds in the background or maybe just in the middle. So a lot of viola playing, especially in orchestras and string quartets, requires blending your sound into others to make sure that you're playing cohesively in the ensemble. All right, let's talk about some technical shifts that you will need to make if you're switching from violin to viola. The first is thinking about bow weight and speed and how you actually produce your sound. So on the violin, it's kind of easy to just get a sound out. You put your bow on the string and you play. On the viola, it's a little bit more complicated. Not to say that it's not complicated on the violin, because there is a big learning curve to getting a really good sound on any string instrument. It doesn't always come naturally to a lot of us, and it's very complex. On the viola though, you will have to work harder to get a really good sound than you do on the violin, at least in my mind and in my body. So one way that I like to demonstrate this is by playing on the E string on the violin and then playing on the C string on the viola, because there is going to be a big difference. So when I'm playing the E string on my violin, I do not need a lot of weight in my arm, and I want to keep my bow rather fast. So my bow speed is kind of just casual. It's like leisurely, I would describe it. I'm not moving my arm super fast, but I'm also not like moving through something really difficult. It just is. And my arm is just moving. It's not heavy on the string. Now, next I'm going to play the way that I just did on the E string on my C string on the viola, and I'm switching to my viola bow, which is heavier. So I set my bow on the string, my arm is not going to be heavy, it's just sitting there, and I'm gonna use that leisurely speed again. Hear how the sound is not full. It doesn't have a lot of depth, it's not super rich. I'll do that again. It doesn't get that full, rich sound. It's not getting any overtones, it's just kind of like nothing special. Now I'm going to make my arm heavier and move my bow a little bit slower. Now that's the sound that we want, right? So heavier arm and bow weight, slower speed. That gets the sound that we want out of the C string, and we can apply that to most of the viola as well. That's a nice rich sound. D string, let's do the same thing. That's getting a little heavy now, and I'm gonna do the A string the same way. That's definitely a heavy sound. We could lighten up a little bit. And that sort of lets the sound sing and vibrate a little bit better. Now, brace yourself. I'm going to play the E string on the violin the same way that I played on the C string. Now please, brace yourself. This may be the ugliest sound that I ever make on this channel. See the difference? It takes a different touch on the viola than it does on the violin. The violin can almost feel effortless in your arm. You want to grip the G string a lot more, definitely, than you do on the E string. But the viola as a whole is going to be a lot more like that. You need to put in more effort, more weight, and a slower bow speed. Really draw the sound out of the viola, whereas the violin sings a little bit more naturally. And that's because the strings of the viola are thicker. They're a little bit further away from the fingerboard, and there's more string to vibrate. So they are a little bit less responsive, and they're a little bit slower to respond. The violin strings have a very high tension, they're thin, and they're close to the fingerboard, which means they're going to speak instantly and just go right away. It takes a little bit of work to start the sound and to keep it going on the viola as well. You also want to play a little bit closer to the bridge on the viola than you would on the violin. The violin gets to a ponticello sound very quickly when you get close-ish to the bridge. I'll just demonstrate that. If you don't know, ponticello is when you play close to or on top of the bridge, and it creates this very eerie kind of Halloween sound. It's not the prettiest, but it's very cool in orchestras, like if you're playing something really eerie or spooky. See how that just kind of set the scene for like a creepy Halloween night? That's ponticello. We don't really want to do that accidentally when we're playing something pretty, but on the viola, I'm as close to the bridge right now as I was playing the violin. And that sounded pretty normal, right? To play ponticello on the viola, you have to be like right on top of the fingerboard. Then we get the sound. But I can play right here. See how close I am? And it still sounds like 97% normal. That is how you're going to get a good sound out of the A string. On the C string, it's not quite as good towards the bridge, but on the higher strings on the viola, playing a little bit closer to the bridge with a heavy bow is going to be your best option. Okay, our second technical shift that you're gonna have to think about and get used to is your left hand spacing and the intonation. If you've been playing the violin for a while, hopefully you are playing with pretty good intonation and you just know how far apart things are and where they are on the violin. The viola is similar, except just on a larger scale, which means everything is gonna be a little bit further apart. Now, on any string instrument that you play, just due to physics, the higher and higher up that you go on the strings, the closer and closer together notes are going to be. So you might be able to like tilt your finger to play a half step up here, this high on the fingerboard. On the C string, that's going to be like this distance. Or you might have to have this spacing for 1, 2, 3, and 4. Whereas you might have to do it there or squished. You might not even be able to put all 4 fingers down at once, that high up. That's true on the violin as well. I'm just saying this is all on a larger scale. So this again ties into finding the right size instrument for yourself, because everything is going to be further apart, which means there's going to be more strain on your body, on your left hand fingers and your muscles in there. A lot of times if you're switching from violin to viola, your finger distance will not be far apart enough. And so just constantly think of stretching, sliding things apart just a little bit more than you might expect. That's gonna get you on the right track a little bit faster. So your hand shape is really going to matter when you're playing the viola, because everything is so far apart. Always try to keep your hand relaxed. If you have tension, it is not going to go well. It's going to hurt everything. And even just doing what I just demonstrated like 5 seconds ago hurt my hands. It hurt my muscles. And now I'm gonna have to be careful the rest of the day, honestly, just because I'm so susceptible to injuries right here. Now, this is a thing on the violin as well, but I really have to think about it consciously on the viola. When you play on the C string or your leftmost string, like the G string on the violin, it's going to be hard for your fingers to reach over there if you're just in a hand position that works on the D, A, and G strings. So what you want to do is bring your elbow inwards. So I'm going from this to this. My thumb kind of goes along with it. Now, look how far I can reach. And if I bring my first finger back, that's a big difference. If I don't do that and I'm playing just with a straight hanging elbow on the C string, my fingers are not going to be rounded and they can't reach nearly as far. So right now I'm doing about this. If I bring my elbow inwards with my thumb down a little bit, that gave me at least a half step. So that is an important thing to think about on the viola. It also helps on the violin too, absolutely. But it's going to be even more important on the viola because you're getting around this wider neck with lower notes that are naturally further apart. On the flip side of that, when you're shifting up on viola or violin, make sure that you're really coming around. Keep your thumb close to your fingers and you'll be able to play on really rounded fingertips. If you're playing on rounded fingertips down here and up here, things are going to feel very similar. You're automatically going to know where a lot of things are. If you're playing rounded fingertips here and flat fingertips up here, it's going to be a lot harder to find your intonation up high. Just a little pro tip and hack for you. I highly recommend doing a lot of scale work and intonation practice, probably with a drone too, if you're switching from violin to viola, to make sure that you're really ingraining that intonation and learning where exactly you need to go. All right, the next technical shift that you'll need to consider is vibrato. On the violin, you can have a tight, fast vibrato and it's gonna sound lovely. On the viola, it might sound a little bit strangled. So the lower the strings that you're playing on, and this applies from viola all the way down to double bass, the wider, slower vibrato that you're going to want to use. So the lower the string, slower, wider vibrato. The higher the string, the faster, more narrow vibrato. So something like this might sound good on the C string. Nice and warm and rich. I'm going to do that same thing on the E string of the violin. We'll see how it sounds. It's a little wobbly, right? We might want something more like this. That just kind of matches the tone of the note better. And of course, we can get a lot more specific with this. It depends on the mood of the piece that you're playing and what kind of story you're trying to tell, where you are in the phrase. That can all affect the speed and the type of vibrato that you're doing. But I'm just kind of finding something that matches with the tone of the note right now. Just kind of like a basic starting point vibrato. So now on the viola, same note that I did before, I'm going to do the same vibrato that I just did that sounded nice on the violin. A little faster, more narrow. It sounds anxious, right? Like it's full of tension and nervous energy, which totally changed the vibe. And now that's a really good example of how vibrato can change the vibe of a note, and you can use that as a puzzle piece when you're doing phrasing. It's a beautiful thing to do, and I think it's really fun to try to paint with those vibrato colors. But you can see for just an average, fine, nice, rich vibrato on either instrument, it takes a different approach. So just to get a good kind of baseline viola vibrato coming from violin, you'll want to think of a slightly slower speed as you do the vibrato and slightly wider oscillations. Doesn't have to be a huge dramatic difference, but it will be a difference. And that's going to help your viola tone sound a lot more natural and a lot more human and just more cohesive overall. Okay, the final technical shift that I will talk about today, and of course there are more of these, but I feel like these are the big ones that can really stump people. The final one today is going to be articulations and bow response. Because, like I mentioned earlier, these strings take a lot longer to respond. On the viola, everything is quick and snappy. It's like a sports car, zips around really fast. On the viola, you're on like an older, like minivan. Maybe not quite a minivan, but something that like it takes a little bit, it's like a little harder to turn the wheel. It doesn't accelerate as fast as you'd want it to. It kind of sputters a little bit, and you have to know what it takes to get the viola to speak the way that you want it to. You have to kind of get to know it and see, okay, it requires this kind of touch, this kind of way. I think the violin is a little bit easier to just sit down and play because it's very responsive and it's very fast. So to get the string to respond in a really healthy way, you want to prepare the bow correctly. If we just kind of start the bow, it speaks, but it's nothing special. If you want a note with a clear beginning, you want to start from the string and give it a little bit of weight and push, and you need to push through the entirety of the bow. Now we're really getting that good tone like we talked about earlier. So this is true for any string instrument. The frog is going to be naturally the heaviest and the tip is the lightest. Our hand is on the frog, which is already the heaviest part of the bow. So this is going to create the most sound and it's going to speak the most right here. The tip of the bow takes a lot more work. It's naturally going to be more quiet over here. So as you're playing the viola, you need to push a little bit here, but then you need to keep pushing. When you get like here and towards the tip, you need to keep that bow weight heavy and sort of slow too. So let's say that I start with a good beginning and I just let it continue. It sort of does a natural decrescendo. It's not as exciting. Now, if I continue pushing the whole way, I'm pushing, I really leaned into my pointer finger over here on the bow, then it created a really interesting full sound for the entirety of the bow. But back to response, it's not totally response, but back to that idea. You're going to have a lot of anticipation in fast passages, and especially if you're starting on an offbeat, if you just think, okay, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, and hear how I'm lagging just a little bit, you have to anticipate 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, and then it comes out the way that we want it to. And this applies to fast passages too. If you're going, it's sort of a little laggy. Think ahead just a little bit. Then that sounded more rhythmically correct and everything was lined up just a little bit better. So now relating articulation to the string response. You're going to have to be very conscious with your articulation. You have to do a lot more work for those articulations to come through because we've got a heavier bow, we've got thicker strings, it's harder to make those sounds. So your staccatos have to be really short to get the sound that you want. If I just do kind of more of a violin style staccato, it's not quite as staccato now because the string is going to continue ringing. So overdo your articulations and then they're gonna pretty much sound correct on the viola. All right, another big shift when you go from violin to viola is reading alto clef. And the most helpful thing I think I can tell you is that the center line of alto clef is going to be middle C. That lines up between treble clef and bass clef. So that is your middle C. Think of where things are on your violin on the G, D, and A strings. It's going to be the same on your viola. And do lots of worksheets, maybe some online games like Staff Dungeon, which I've talked about before on my channel. It's really fun. There are a lot of other games on that website, Dr. Music, as well. Do a lot of that practice to start learning alto clef. You're gonna get there. Just don't be afraid of it. It's not nearly as scary as you might think. Okay, now for 2 quick mindset shifts when you're going from violin to viola. And my cat Pacho is here to help you out with these today. The first mindset shift to consider is really embracing yourself as a violist. You don't have to erase yourself as a violinist, especially if you want to continue playing the violin. You know, if you want to be multi-instrumental and do both, that's okay. It's just a slightly different persona between violin and viola. You can have your violin identity as one thing, but playing the viola also requires its own identity. And that is being an inner voice, expressing yourself, having that rich sound. And really there's kind of a culture to being a violist as well as being a violinist. They're just different. Violists might be a little bit more eccentric. And I mean, it might be the dark side, but we have a lot of fun here. That's why I call it Life from the Viola section. You know, it's fun. It's a great life. Even though people make fun of us, it's fun here. So some characteristics that you might want to kind of think about having as a violist are just having a warmth to your sound instead of that brilliant ringing tone. We provide the warmth, that chocolatey sound to music. You're going to support the spotlight rather than be in it all the time. Supporting characters are still very, very important. Sometimes supporting characters are my favorite in a book or movie. You get to be that supporting character. Sometimes you step into the spotlight, but you're not always in it. It's just different, and it's more of a teamwork activity being a violist than it is, you know, being the main event as a violinist. You also want to start valuing blending in the ensemble. I mean, hopefully you are already, but it's really a listening game, being a violist if you're playing in an ensemble. Listen to others and blend into them. Finally, another characteristic of being a violist is patience. This is a heavier instrument. It's larger. The response time is slower. All these things that I talked about, getting used to those things. And even, you know, if you are a really good professional violist, you still have to deal with the slower response, consciously making a really, really good sound, consciously making really dramatic articulations. You always have to deal with those things. So playing the viola requires a lot of patience. Try to stay patient as you switch and as you continue to get better and better at the viola. Okay, our second mindset shift, switching from violin to viola, is just letting go of those violinistic habits. A lot of what I just talked about here a minute ago. But violin playing techniques and habits that don't go so well on the viola are fast, narrow vibrato, light bowing, playing with a bright tone, and just assuming that you're always the melody. Those are things that you want to kind of push out of your mind when you're playing the viola. They can absolutely enter back into your mind when you go back to the violin. The viola is just going to be different, that's all. Your new goals might be larger motions, keeping your stamina up. That's a huge one as a violist. We are always thinking about our stamina and avoiding injuries. Just because this instrument is large and bulky, it can be hard to get around. It's just a consideration that a lot of us need to make. You might want to think about having a darker color palette to bring out those rich dark chocolate sounds. And you want to be more of the foundation instead of the main event. And so switching from violin to viola is a lot, both mentally and physically with your technique. And, you know, it's a huge brain exercise as well. You might think that these two instruments are super similar because they look similar. Their ranges are very, very close, but it is a big shift to go from one to the other, more than you might expect. So definitely keep these tips in mind if you're considering switching. And if there's anything that you found especially helpful, please leave them down in the comments for others to discover and to help them out on their journey. Over on my blog, I will have all of these ideas written out within a blog post. I will also include some quick tips tips to transition smoothly from violin to viola. So if you would like to know what those tips are, definitely check out my blog. It's always linked down in the description box below. Thank you so much for watching, and good luck on your viola journey.